fade in.
We are really excited to have with us for our next keynote conversation, Bob Chapek. He is the chairman and CEO of the Walt Disney Company. Before becoming the seventh CEO in Disney's nearly 100-year history, Bob served as chairman of Disney Parks, Experiences, and Products, basically since that segment was created, and before that was running the Parks and Resorts business. Bob, it's great to see you, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Ben. I appreciate it.
When you step back and sort of think about where the company is today compared to when you took the job a year ago, how would you size it up for us when you look out from here?
Well, overall, I think I'd say that despite all the significant challenges that have been laid in our path over the last year, we feel as optimistic now as ever about the future course of the company. You know, we had three priorities when it was apparent what was COVID and what it was going to do to our company and our outlook. And the first one was really to stabilize the company. And our CFO, Christine McCarthy, did a tremendous job of ensuring that we had the liquidity necessary for the long haul if it ended up being a long haul. And certainly she had the foresight to recognize that, yes, it was going to be a long haul. But the other two things are important from a business standpoint. And the first one is obviously the already established pivot to direct-to-consumer. And so we essentially had to make a decision. Are we going to stay the course? Are we going to slow down? Because obviously an investment would be sort of an important thing when you're trying to, reserve cash and be careful. But as you know, we stepped on the throttle pretty heavily and accelerated, figuring this was the time to really make a giant leap forward, if you will. And we did that in two ways. Number one, we increased our investment dramatically in content, and you saw the fruits of that labor at the investor conference a few months ago. But then we also reorganized the company to facilitate really a complete alignment of all of our interest towards our strategic imperative of direct-to-consumer.
One thing I wanted to ask you at the top was about what it means for the Disney company to have a scaled distribution business where you have a direct customer relationship with, hundreds of millions of people around the world. That's something that the company's never had before. You've been in lots of different businesses inside Disney. You've typically sold, through retailers. What do you think it means long-term beyond just the streaming business to have this kind of customer relationship at scale around the world?
Well, we've actually, I think, done a pretty good job of having a direct relationship with our customer in the parks business. We've had a pretty good insight as to, what our guests prefer, what they do, how they act, and have catered to that throughout the years.
You get Mandalorian stuff. Do you have anything Cara Dune? What is that? She's the character played by Gina Carano. What's that? Cara Dune, Mandalorian. What's the Mandalorian? Bounty hunter. The answer is no.
I think the difference now with DTC is that we've got the opportunity to increase the frequency of our engagement and the number of touch points. And so I think there's an exponential benefit when you take the deep knowledge that we have of our parks guests. And so we feel really enthusiastic about what's going to happen when we take 1 + 1 and make it 3. I think if you look at our unparalleled brands, the franchises that make up those brands, the tremendous content creators we have leading each one of our segments, and then the actual content that's pouring out and the amount of content that's pouring out, we think that we're tremendously positioned for the future for a DTC services.
And how do you guys think about budgeting the business? In other words, you guided to $8 to $9 billion of investment at Disney Plus by 24. Obviously no one has a crystal ball, but how do you think about the amount of capital needed to get where you want to go from a revenue and sub point of view? And you've continued to emphasize or expect that 21 will be the year of peak losses for the business and then profitability in fiscal 24. You launched in the U.S. and among other things, you had your Verizon partnership, which I think has been quite a success for both Disney and Verizon. Globally, you're doing a lot of the same, kind of deals around, distribution deals. Can you talk about the trade-offs that these agreements represent in terms of the benefits and what you give up going through a third party on the digital side?
Right. Well, the benefit is that they really help us accelerate growth at a relatively efficient marketing spend. The detriment, obviously, is the fact that you're going to get a lower ARPU because of it, because now you've got someone else who's, participating in the revenue stream. And you and I, before we started, were chatting up, the Galaxy's Edge, the Star Wars Land, and the Rise of the Resistance. And that is a perfect example of using technology to tell a story. There's 1 million lines of code in that program that runs Rise of the Resistance, which makes it extremely complicated.
All personnel to that station.
Stop, the prisoners have escaped.
How brave, but ultimately hopeless. There's nowhere to run.
What are you guys doing? What are you and Kevin and the team doing to make sure that Marvel continues to thrive, particularly as you weave in Disney Plus, and the amount of content coming to us is going up, pretty dramatically?
I would say the situation is the same for Marvel as it is Lucas. And it goes to speak to the talent of not only Kevin and his team, but Kathleen Kennedy and her team over at Lucas. I mean, we're really fortunate to have both groups being led by such stellar creative talent. But in terms of, fatigue, I guess that's borne out in the numbers, right? So the creative canvas, if you will, is very broad for both Lucas and Star Wars, as well as Disney, and very multi-dimension. So, yes, it's superheroes in Marvel's case, but it's more. And yes, it's a galaxy far, far away for Lucas, but it's very more. And they're just going to keep on growing because of the great creative talent we have.
Yeah, it must be interesting to see how the television product on Disney Plus reinforces the film product, and that should be something that we see play out now over the next couple of years, I'd imagine.
Yeah, that's where they're at their best, managing that mythology so that there's, little pieces here and there that they dribble out and they all connect. It's really amazing. Geniuses.
Yeah. Yep. No question. Maybe just to wrap up on the studio side, you guys announced, as you mentioned, Bob, at the beginning, a pretty massive reorg. And I think I asked you this question back, I think maybe in November, about how the organization has absorbed these changes. I think about some of the executives, Jimmy Pitaro at ESPN, Dana Walden, Peter Rice, John Landgraf. These are people who've risen up to the most senior levels and been very successful in the entertainment business. And they're now no longer running a P&L. They're in charge of running very important, powerful studios, but it's a big change nonetheless. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about the implications of all this, any growing pains, and whether it's playing out as you'd hoped. Are you achieving your goals that you when you put this in place last year?
Sure. Well, just like Kevin and Kathy and Sean at the studio, Jimmy, Dana, Peter, and John are absolute treasures for us from a creative standpoint, driving this machine, for giving you the kind of content that you saw at the investor conference. Obviously, way before the rest of the world knew what we were going to do from an organizational standpoint, I began a socialization process of the idea. And these very same people that you've talked about, I socialized this idea, sort of expressing the benefit of this. And I'll tell you, we've had very strong buy-in. People like the idea of clear accountability. They like the ability to be nimble, to be able to pivot, and to respond in a way that the consumer's going. And it requires a very collaborative environment, which I'm pleased to say we're seeing, but at very clear swim lanes. And certainly it's changed, and change can be disruptive. But I have to say, all the folks that you mentioned have been spectacular in terms of their flexibility and their willingness to be elastic and understand the bigger organizational benefits. And as a result, we're seeing the advantages in this dynamic, fast-moving world that we're competing in.
Please like, subscribe, and comment on the video. May the Force be with you.
Most impressive.